A broke mechanic inherits a $3.4 million mansion from the man he blames for his mother's death. But inside that house, there's a sealed room, a padded chair bolted to the floor, and a secret that could destroy half the city. The envelope arrived without warning. Thick cream-colored paper, handwritten address, sealed with red wax like something out of a century past. Jacob Farris turned it over twice in his calloused hands before tearing it open. He hadn't received anything handwritten in years, much less something that smelled faintly of tobacco and oak wood. Inside, one folded page, heavy ink, and a name that made his throat tighten. To Jacob Farris, from the estate of Vincent Chase, deceased. You are requested to attend the reading of the will on the 14th of June, 10 a.m., at Holloway and Brooke Solicitors, Boston. He read it twice, then again. Then he tossed it across the kitchen table like it had burned him. Vincent Chase was dead. Good, he thought. He said it aloud too, good. But the word landed hollow, like a marble dropped in an empty sink. The apartment smelled of leftover takeout and engine grease. Outside, the traffic muttered its usual complaints, horns and heat pressing against the cracked window. Jacob sat down slowly, staring at the letter. Why him? Vincent Chase was a name Jacob had buried, boxed up, and left to rot along with every bitter thing about his past. They weren't family, not by blood. Vincent had been his mother's employer, a millionaire real estate mogul with steel gray eyes and a tongue sharp enough to carve a man in half. He owned half of Massachusetts in deeds and contracts, but Jacob had never known him as anything but a tyrant. Vincent had ruined his mother, not with violence, no, he was far more elegant than that. He broke people with expectations, ruthless standards, cold silences. Jacob remembered the long nights she came home, silent, clutching her purse like it held her spine in place. He begged her to quit. He pays me fairly, she used to say. He doesn't have to be kind. But after she was gone, after the pills, the breakdown, the quiet funeral nobody from Vincent's estate attended, Jacob swore he'd never speak that man's name again. Until now. 3 days later, Jacob stood outside Holloway and Brooke in a borrowed shirt and the only blazer that still fit. The city loomed around him, humming with summer heat. The receptionist greeted him with a nod like she knew everything and led him to a small walnut-paneled room. There were 4 other people already seated. A woman in pearls who looked like she hadn't smiled since the 80s, a man with a leather briefcase and snakeskin shoes, a younger woman, mid-20s, hair like fire, who glanced up and gave Jacob a nod, and one empty seat. He took it. The lawyer arrived, gray suit, silver tie, voice like sandpaper. We'll begin. The will was long, boring, real estate, stocks, donations to obscure charities. Jacob stopped listening after the 3rd paragraph until he heard his own name. And to Jacob Farris, I leave the Westfield property and all associated accounts, provided he meets the condition attached to this bequest. Jacob's eyes snapped to the lawyer. What condition? He asked, his voice sharper than he intended. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. You are to reside at the Westfield estate for 1 calendar year. Full-time, no rental, no subletting. You may not sell or alter the property during this time. If you complete this term, the estate is yours, valued currently at $3.4 million. The room was dead quiet. Jacob laughed once, sharp and bitter. Why would that bastard leave me anything? The lawyer hesitated, then handed him a second envelope, smaller, with his name in that same precise handwriting. A letter from Vincent Chase. Jacob stared at it. He didn't open it. He just stood up, walked out, and let the door swing shut behind him. Outside, the sun had vanished behind heavy clouds. And Jacob Farris, broke mechanic with grease under his nails and rage in his blood, stood at the edge of a choice he never asked for and didn't understand. But he knew this much. Vincent Chase hadn't given him a gift. He'd left a trap. Westfield was not a house. It was a fortress with a garden, 3 stories of limestone and glass perched on the shoulder of a wooded hill in Ashfield County, 30 minutes outside Boston. The kind of place where the floors were warmed by silent vents and the ceilings had moldings that looked hand-painted. The kind of place where someone like Jacob didn't belong. The key came in a padded envelope, along with a single sheet of instructions. No staff, no renovations, no guests for longer than 3 days. Legalese dressed up like hospitality. He drove up in his battered Chevy pickup, the same one he'd rebuilt with his mother when he was 16. It clashed with the wrought iron gate and pristine gravel driveway. The security system blinked awake as he stepped inside, glass doors sliding open like it had been waiting. The silence inside was deafening, furniture covered in white cloths, a layer of dust on the windowsills, and in the foyer above the marble floor a portrait. Vincent Chase in oil and canvas, towering. Jacob didn't look up at it. He just dropped his bag, found the kitchen, and opened every cabinet until he found a bottle of scotch. It was half full, 20 years old, and tasted like fire and old grudges. He drank alone, seated on a stool that probably cost more than his car. The first week passed like slow fog. Jacob explored room by room, each more sterile than the last. No signs of life. No forgotten socks, no grocery lists, no clutter. Just the shell of a man who'd built everything to impress and nothing to hold. On the seventh day, he opened a locked drawer in the upstairs study. Inside, a small box sealed with tape. He slid it open. Letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Vincent, written in a feminine script. All from his mother. Jacob's stomach lurched. He hadn't known she wrote him. After she quit working for Vincent, she'd barely said his name again. Now here were pages dated from the year before her death, all signed Marina. He read one, then another's. They weren't angry, they weren't even desperate. They were filled with quiet things, updates about Jacob's life, her illness, her regrets. He still thinks you hate him, but I think part of him never stopped waiting for you to prove him wrong. Jacob sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. Had she forgiven Vincent? Had she wanted him to? That night he didn't sleep. The shadows in the house felt closer, the silence louder. On day 15, someone knocked on the front door. It startled him. He hadn't seen another person since he arrived. He opened it to find the young, red-haired woman from the will reading. She wore jeans, sunglasses, and a smirk like she was already bored. Jacob Farris, she asked. Yes. I'm Ava Chase, Vincent's granddaughter. He blinked. He didn't have kids. Didn't tell people he did know. She stepped inside without asking. But he had a daughter, my mother. They didn't speak for 15 years. Jacob didn't move. Relax, she said, glancing around. I'm not here to contest anything, just curious what kind of man gets an estate over blood. I didn't ask for it. She turned back to him, sharp eyes narrowing. But you're staying. Only for the year, then it's mine and I'm selling every inch of it. She looked at him for a long moment. You think he gave you this to reward you? Jacob didn't answer. Ava stepped closer, and for the first time her smirk faded. He gave you this house to break you. And with that she left, heels echoing across the marble like gunshots. Jacob watched her go, heart pounding. In the silence that followed, he finally opened the letter from Vincent. Just 6 words. You don't know the whole story. The morning after Ava's visit, Jacob couldn't shake her words. He gave you this house to break you. It echoed unwelcome like a leaky faucet in the back of his mind. Jacob had never believed in ghosts, but Westfield carried a presence, a subtle unease, a heaviness in the air. The kind of weight that didn't come from structure or silence but from history. Every hallway felt like it watched him. Every creaking floorboard seemed intentional. He started digging. Not in the literal sense, though part of him wondered what he'd find beneath the cellar floor, but in paper. Vincent Chase had kept meticulous records, boxes of documents in the attic, investment portfolios, deeds, signed NDAs, private correspondences. Jacob poured through them, late into the night, cigarette smoke curling into stained air vents. Patterns emerged. Vincent had been ruthless with competitors, sure. But it was the betrayals inside his circle that chilled Jacob. People he'd mentored, funded, even considered friends, cut out, destroyed, ruined the second they crossed some invisible line. And there, tucked inside a folder marked personal, MF, contract. His mother's name, a severance agreement. But it wasn't about her quitting. It was a payoff, a settlement. The words blurred as he read it again. In exchange for termination of all claims, Marina Farris agrees to accept payment of $150,000, relinquishing all further contact with Mr. Vincent Chase and Associates. Claims. Jacob's hands trembled. He searched deeper, a separate letter from Vincent to his legal team. She won't go to the press, she still cares, but pay her enough and make it clean. I won't have this get messy, not with the IPO weeks away. Jacob dropped the papers. There had been something between them, something deeper, maybe darker than he ever imagined. Had his mother been coerced, threatened? Or worse, protected him from a truth she didn't want him to carry? The next week passed in a fog. He stopped opening the curtains. He forgot to eat. The house felt smaller, closer. He began dreaming of things that didn't exist, phone calls from his mother that never happened, conversations in rooms that never existed. Each time he woke, sweat-soaked and gasping, he found himself somewhere else in the mansion, hallways, guest rooms, once even curled on the marble staircase like a discarded coat. On the 23rd day, a voice called from the study. Jacob. He jolted. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. Jacob. He stepped inside. No one's. But on the desk, a new folder, one he hadn't seen before. Inside, a photo. His mother, young, laughing, in Vincent's arms. And behind them, in the corner of the frame, a boy. Him. Jacob staggered back. He didn't remember that moment. But the photo was real, the date on the back in her handwriting, summer 1999. He couldn't be more than 6. Why had she hidden this? Why had Vincent kept it? The next day, Ava returned. This time, he met her on the porch. You knew, he said, didn't you? She raised a brow, know what? He held up the photo. She didn't even flinch, it took you long enough. What is this? My mother told me years ago that Vincent had a second life, that he loved someone, quietly, shamefully, someone he didn't believe fit in his world. Jacob stared at her, blood draining from his face. He's my father. It wasn't a question, it was a sentence, hard and final. Ava gave a small, sad nod. Half-brother, I guess, family reunion. Jacob backed away like she'd struck him. Vincent Chase wasn't just the man who'd ruined his mother. He was the man who'd made him. And abandoned them both. Ava reached into her bag and handed him a small black notebook. Read this, then decide what to do with the rest of the year. She turned, walked back to her car and left him there, staring at a truth he didn't ask for. And a house full of lies he now had to live in. The notebook Ava gave him was smaller than a paperback, bound in black leather and worn along the edges like it had traveled through more hands than time. Inside, Vincent Chase's handwriting, precise, angular, impatient. It wasn't a journal. It was confessional, not written for posterity but for someone specific, for him. If you're reading this, then the lawyers followed instructions and you took the bait. Or maybe you're smarter than I thought. I never knew how to say things outright, Jacob. I failed at a lot of things. This might top the list. Jacob sat in the old library, windows closed against the storm rattling the glass. He read each line like it might set fire to the page. I didn't walk away from you because I hated you. I walked away because I was weak. Your mother asked me to choose and I couldn't. She said love wasn't measured by silence but by presence. She was right, I still left. There were entries spanning years, not daily. Just thoughts, confessions, regrets scribbled after mergers, family birthdays missed, holidays spent alone. I watched from afar. You grew up without me, and every time I tried to reach out, I remembered the damage I'd already done. I told myself it was noble to stay away. Truth is, I was just a coward. Jacob clenched the notebook so hard his knuckles went white. It was all there. Vincent knew what he'd done to Marina, knew the fallout, knew the quiet suffering. She loved you more than she hated me. I never deserved that kind of grace. And in the last entry, dated 6 months before his death. Westfield was my prison. I built it to prove I could make something indestructible, but even with all that stone and glass, I was always hollow. If you stay a year, Jacob, maybe you'll understand, maybe you'll see the bones beneath the marble, and maybe you'll decide to forgive me or burn it all down. Either way, it's yours. Jacob closed the book. Then he cried for the first time in 15 years. The next morning, he found a dead bird on the veranda, neck twisted, wings splayed. He stared at it, wondering why it felt like an omen. Then he saw the scratch marks on the door. Not animals, keys or fingernails. Someone had tried to break in. Ava. No, the police would have asked questions. She was too smart for something so crude. Jacob checked the camera system Vincent had installed. Most weren't even connected. A couple blinked red just for show. He was alone. But someone wanted in. That night he opened the east wing for the first time. It had been sealed, locked from both ends. Inside, dust, furniture draped in sheets, but the air smelled different, like rot. He followed the scent to a room with no windows, storage. Boxes of documents, old cassette tapes, medical records. And in the far corner, a padded chair bolted to the floor. Restraints. He backed out slowly, bile rising in his throat. This wasn't Vincent's office. It was where Vincent kept someone. A private hospital or worse. He found the patient files, labeled Subject A. Chase, Margaret. Ava's mother. Institutionalized, unlisted facility, no known cause of condition. Jacob read the physician notes. Severe emotional dysregulation, delusions, episodes of aggression. Mr. Chase insists on private care, no legal intervention. She hadn't disappeared. Vincent had hidden her. Ava never said her mother was dead, only that they hadn't spoken in years. Why? Why hide your own daughter? Why pay for her care in secret while pretending she didn't exist? Unless it wasn't just shame. It was a guilt. Jacob slammed the file shut. The house wasn't just a mausoleum of memory. It was a crime scene. That night he packed a bag. He couldn't stay, not with everything pressing in: Vincent's ghost, the secrets, the padded chair in the dark. But as he stepped out, headlights flooded the driveway. A black SUV. Jacobs ducked behind a column, heart pounding. The vehicle idled, then slowly the passenger window rolled down. A man leaned out, dark suit, silver hair, expressionless. He looked directly at Jacob, then gave a small, slow nod, and drove away. Jacob didn't sleep that night. The game Vincent started wasn't over. And Jacob Farris was in it whether he wanted to be or not. By morning, the SUV was gone. No tracks, no footage. Jacob replayed the moment over and over, how the man had looked directly at him, nodded like they shared a secret. Who was he? Not a lawyer, not press, not a burglar, too calm for that. Jacob checked the mailbox. Inside was a new envelope, unmarked, cream-colored like the one that started it all. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no name. Some inherit wealth, others inherit damage. Westfield is both, you were not the only heir. Jacob stood frozen on the porch, wind brushing the paper like breath on his neck. Something shifted behind the walls of the house then, not literally, but in the way it felt. As if the mansion had drawn a slow, satisfied breath. He wasn't alone. Not spiritually, legally. The rest of the morning, he searched property records. Vincent had hidden ownership beneath shell companies, but with enough digging, Jacob found it. A joint trust. 2 beneficiaries. His name and Ava's. She'd lied. She wasn't just visiting, she owned Westfield too. He found her at a cafe downtown, mid-afternoon, sipping black coffee with her sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. I assume this isn't a social call, she said as he sat. You lied. She raised one brow, define lie. You said you weren't contesting the estate. I'm not, she sipped her coffee, because I already own half. Jacob slammed the envelope down on the table. She didn't flinch, just looked at him, patient. I didn't want to share the house, she said. I wanted to see what you'd do with it, if you'd sell, run, crack. Why? Because that's what he did, she said softly. Jacob leaned back. He left you the house to test you, she continued. Me, he left me silence. And trust paperwork buried in 4 levels of law firms, it's not a gift, it's an indictment. An indictment of what? Of us, her voice dropped. The next generation, what we'll do with what he built, whether we repeat him. Jacob felt the bottom drop from under his anger. Not vanish, just shift. Ava wasn't here for money. She was here because this house, this inheritance, had made or broken everyone who touched it. She was seeing if it would break him. And he asked. Too early to tell. Back at Westfield, Jacob started to make changes. Not big ones, he was still legally barred, but personal ones. He moved into Vincent's bedroom, took down the oil portrait in the foyer, opened the windows, let light into the house like air into a wound. He stopped drinking. Started fixing things, the old garden irrigation system, the broken shutters in the west wing, the water pressure in the upstairs bathroom. Not because he wanted to stay. Because something in him needed to prove the house could serve life, not just power. One morning, while repairing a loose banister in the back staircase, he found a hidden compartment beneath the landing. A narrow metal box. Inside, photos, dozens. Of Jacob. As a child, teen, young adult. Graduation from high school, first job at the garage, a picture taken outside the courthouse on the day of his mother's funeral. Vincent had been watching. Not from guilt. From longing. And still, he had done nothing. That night, he called Ava's. We're burning it, he said. There was a pause. All of it. Everything but the truths. She arrived 2 days later, with hard drives, boxes, and a manila folder labeled MF Final. "What's this?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time. "Your mother's voice." Inside were audio cassettes, therapy sessions, recorded calls, a final letter dictated shaky but unmistakably hers. Jacob locked himself in the study and listened. "Jacob, if you ever find this, I didn't want you to hate him. I just didn't want you to become him. That was always my fear, not that you'd grow bitter, but that you'd grow cold, like he did. He was never empty, he was just afraid. I loved him, God help me, I did, and I loved you more, so I left so you could breathe." By the end, Jacob was on the floor. The house didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like a test he hadn't realized he'd already passed. But he wasn't done. Because someone else had been watching, still was. And the man in the SUV. He wasn't gone. Jacob stopped waiting for peace. The more truth he uncovered, the less it soothed him. That house, Vincent's house, his house now, held memories like it held heat in its stone walls, slowly, unforgivingly. And somewhere beneath all that stone, someone else was still pulling strings. The man in the SUV had returned. Not to the driveway, but to the margins. Jacob caught glimpses, once at the edge of the property line near the woods, another time on the neighbor's security camera standing motionless on the roadside, never approaching, always watching. Jacob took a picture the third time, ran it through facial recognition with Ava's help. No IDs. No match in any public database. A ghost. And then one morning, Jacob woke to find the garden dug up, not vandalized, searched. The soil around the greenhouse turned over carefully as if someone was hunting for something buried long ago. He confronted Ava. She paled. There was a ledger, she said. Vincent kept a second book, not digital, not filed, old-school handwritten records, deals off the books, payoffs, blackmail. Where? He told my mother it was buried. Jacob looked out the window. The greenhouse, the fountain, the old stone bench, all just markers now. What's in it? He asked. Names, she said, the kind that could collapse entire lives. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't think it was real, she said, until someone else came looking. They searched for 3 days. They found it on the 4th. Buried beneath the floor of the greenhouse under a rusted drain panel wrapped in wax paper and duct tape. Inside, a thick black notebook, pages filled in tight handwriting, Vincent's. It was worse than they imagined. Politicians, judges, CEOs, real estate schemes tied to gentrification efforts, bribes disguised as scholarships, land purchases with manipulated zoning permissions, even offshore accounts tied to shell charities. Jacob sat in the garage that night, the book open on his lap, his breath ragged. This was his inheritance too. Not just money. Power. Corrupt naked's lethal power. Ava paced behind him. If this gets out, it won't. She stopped. He stood slowly, holding the book like it might explode. We're not exposing it, he said, not through the media, not through the police. Then what? She snapped. We're using it to end it. That weekend, Jacob drove to Boston. To a name in the book. Luther Grant, former city planner, now CEO of a multi-million-dollar contracting firm, one of Vincent's silent allies. Jacob asked for 10 minutes of his time. He got 5. He laid the book on Luther's polished desk, opened to a page with Luther's signature and 3 coded payments. Luther didn't blink, didn't reach for a lawyer. He just looked up and said, "What do you want?" Jacob smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I want a clean audit of every company Vincent touched in the last 15 years. I want full release of Westfield from its zoning restrictions. And I want every person you bribed to know their names not in danger, yet. Luther leaned back. You don't scare me, son. I'm not trying to, Jacob said. I'm just finishing what Vincent started, but without becoming him. That night, Jacob and Ava burned the rest of the ledger. Not all of it, just the parts they didn't need. The rest was placed in a fireproof box. Stored at a lawyer's office, under strict instructions. If anything happened to either of them, it would go wide. It wasn't blackmail. It was insurance. And as the ashes curled into the sky above the Westfield greenhouse, Jacob finally understood what Vincent had built. Not a home. A throne. And now that throne sat empty, waiting for its next ruler. But Jacob wasn't interested in ruling. He was interested in rebuilding. Even if he had to tear down everything, Vincent left him to do it. Westfield looked different by summer's end. Not in architecture, that was still cold, elegant, imposing, but something about the air had shifted. The quiet was no longer oppressive, it was thoughtful, as if the house was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. Jacob stood in the garden, his mother's garden now reclaimed, no longer a place of secrets but of memory. He had replanted it weed by weed, kept the broken stone bench she used to sit on, installed a new fountain, low and simple. It burbled quietly behind him as he looked up at the house. Ava joined him, coffee in one hand, file folder in the other. "I'm leaving," she said. He nodded. "I figured." "I transferred my rights to the estate into your name," she said, handing him the folder, "on one condition." "What?" "You keep the portrait," she said, smirking slightly. Jacob groaned. "That thing's a curse." "Maybe," she said, "but it's also history, yours, mine, his." He took the folder. "Thanks." She didn't say goodbye. She just turned, walked toward her car, and paused once at the gate. "You're not him," she said, "but you are his legacy, just make it a better one." And then she was gone. Jacob didn't stay at Westfield. Not forever. He sold the estate, but not to developers. He turned it into a rehabilitation center, funded by the remainder of Vincent's empire with the help of names from the ledger who suddenly remembered how to be generous. He called it the Farris Foundation, a name that meant something real. He moved into a modest house outside of Cambridge, opened a new garage, hired former inmates and kids from foster care with nowhere else to go, taught them to build engines, fix brakes, diagnose problems one part at a time. The first plaque they installed in the garage read, "You are not what they leave you. You are what you choose to build from it." Sometimes he still dreamed of Westfield. Not the house, the silence, the waiting. But now when he woke, he didn't feel trapped. He felt chosen. Not by Vincent. By his mother. By himself. One fall evening, a package arrived. No note. Just a small black and white photograph. Jacob and his mother, he was 5, sitting on her lap smiling. Behind them, barely in frame, Vincent looking down at them. Not smiling, but watching. Always watching. Jacob framed it. Hung it above the garage office door. Not as forgiveness. Not as tribute. But as proof that even the worst inheritance can become something good, if you're willing to live with the truth of it, carry the weight, and never look away.